Good evening, and welcome to the National Aquarium. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome you all here to witness the kickoff of our Marjorie Lynn Bank lecture series for 2014. And by the way, it's really the reviving of a great tradition that started several years ago with the Bank family. In honor of a woman that I wish I'd met, a diver, photographer, and wonderful friend of the aquarium, Marjorie Lynn Bank, after whom this lecture series is named. And this is the kickoff for 2014, and we've stepped up our game. We have the great good fortune to have a very distinguished speaker tonight, and she will lead the way with a whole series of really amazing people who will be speaking in the series this spring and again this fall. And the theme is hope spots and sanctuaries. And you're going to hear a lot about that tonight and a lot more about that in the months to come. I do want to recognize the person who made it possible to have the Marjorie Lynn Bank lecture series, and that is our lifelong friend, longtime volunteer, donor, amazing person, Penny. Would you please take a wave? Penny Bank. It is apparently my job to embarrass her at every public opportunity. And every time she says, don't do that again. I'd also like to extend a very special thank you to some really important friends of ours here who represent an agency that in my heart is one of the most important in our government, and that's NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And we are lucky to have here tonight with us several important members of that organization, but the two that I want to call out and ask to take a wave are its acting administrator, and we all presume and hope permanent administrator, Dr. Catherine Sullivan. Where are you, Kathy? Somewhere there she is, way in the back. And right down here in front, and very apropos of what we're all about here in terms of sanctuaries, the longtime chief of the National Marine Sanctuary Program, Dan Basta. Dan? So with that, and actually I've got three board members that I think I need to also equally embarrass here just because I have the chance. So I think I only have three in attendance. I'm going to be in big trouble if there's more. But I'd like to ask just briefly if Jennifer Reynolds and Scott Plank, and I've got Jane Dropa here tonight. Would you three just sort of give a little wave? Thank you. There's Jennifer. Thank you. So I'm not going to introduce our speaker. I've left that to better people. But I did get a chance to do something really great today, which was spend the day following the amazing Dr. Sylvia Earle. And one of the things that happened while chasing her around Washington, well, first of all, 2,000 kids were moved to hopefully become marine scientists. A bunch of Congress people were reminded of their important role in this nation's future and how important the ocean is to it. And then there were these two quotations that I scribbled down quickly that were spoken by her deepness. The greatest value of the ocean to us humans is our existence. And we have not been accounting for nature. The basis value of fish is not zero. So you're going to hear more about that from Sylvia. But before you do, I want to introduce a friend, colleague, a man who has put a lot of energy into the concept of creating and maintaining and supporting a network of marine protected areas in our country. And that is Mr. Jason Patlis, who is the CEO of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. Jason?
Thank you very much, John. And thank you to the National Aquarium for embarking on what will be a most wonderful lecture tonight, and that will continue over the course of the year with a wonderful series of lectures to follow. And what better way to start the series with its inaugural speaker tonight, Dr. Sylvia Earle. This lecture series embodies the crafting of a new partnership between the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation and the National Aquarium. and we're really delighted by it. My job as the head of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation is to champion and showcase our national marine sanctuaries, which are the crown jewels of the ocean. But as you know, these places are far offshore, they're deep under the water, they're not exactly easily accessible. They're not like our national parks with ring roads, historic hotels, tours, and concessions that make it available. So we need, given that we cannot bring you to the sanctuaries so easily, we need to figure out a way to bring our national marine sanctuaries to you all. And we do it through partners like the National Aquarium and through John and his team. As you walk through the exhibits here at the National Aquarium, next time pay attention to where you see markings and blurbs talking about our national marine sanctuaries. So the National Aquarium does it through the exhibits, they do it through lectures like this as well. And so we're really grateful to the partnership that we're embarking on tonight. Through these lectures, you'll get a hint of how special these national marine sanctuaries are. But they're more than just the places at sea. They're part of the essential, they're an essential thread of the very fabric of our nation. And let me leave you with this thought. Today is the 112th birthday of John Steinbeck, one of the great American authors. And one of his greatest books was, of course, Cannery Row, about Monterey Bay. But when you think about the other quintessentially great American authors, you think of Herman Melville and writing about whaling off New England. You think about Ernest Hemingway, his home and his inspiration in the Florida Keys. You think about James Michener and his books Hawaii and Tales of the South Pacific, which won the Pulitzer. All of these places that were the home and inspiration of these great American authors, all national marine sanctuaries. It's not a coincidence that these are the places that define our nation at sea, underwater. And so it's really wonderful that we can bring our national marine sanctuaries to you all tonight with the help of John and Eric Schwab and the entire team here at the National Aquarium. So I'm deeply indebted to you and everybody, and looking forward to this evening. Thank you.
Well, I just want to share one anecdote before I introduce the gentleman who's going to introduce the speaker who's going to introduce you to the ocean. We plan to be here till 11:30. I hope you've... 3 aquariums back in my life. The aforementioned Monterey Bay was my stomping grounds, and I was at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it is one of those little footnotes to history that while there in about 1980, I can't keep track anymore, and Sylvia, you probably do remember because unlike me, she has a mind like a steel trap. I had the distinct honor to introduce Dr. Earle and Dr. Sullivan in the same moment at the kelp forest at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and here's how it went. Dr. Sullivan had just finished, I think, your first or second, thank you, shuttle flight. She's been up in the shuttle 3 times, and had then, and I believe still holds the distinction of being the highest flying female astronaut in the history of the nation. She went up. And so I introduced her as the woman who had reached the highest heights of any woman in America. And then I had this inspiration to invert that and introduce Sylvia as the woman who'd plunged to the deepest depths of any woman in America. And she's been giving me grief about that for 25 years since. The best thing that happened to me was meeting Sylvia back in the 80s at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, but the thing that really brought it home was when I had a chance to work with you, Sylvia, to help you get started on what has now become a far more meaningful enterprise than when I was involved. But that's her foundation, which is called Mission Blue, the Sylvia Earle Alliance. She wouldn't let us call it the Sylvia Earle Foundation. She didn't want her name on it, but we snuck it in as a subscript. And then to have been a witness to both Sylvia's efforts to launch a fabulous thing called Google Ocean, which if you've never played with, you must. It is the best enhancement ever done to Google Earth. And she shamed them into doing it. It's a great story I won't tell. And to have been there while she was the awardee of the TED Prize in 2009, which really did launch this concept of hope that you're going to hear about tonight. That foundation then went on to greater things. And one of the great things it went on to was the leadership of a person that many of you know, a treasurer of our region and the executive director of Mission Blue. And that is my friend, the father of Sherman, as in Sherman's Lagoon, Mr. Jim Toomey. And Jim's going to introduce Sylvia. Jim, would you like to come up?
What do you do when you realize there's one too many speakers and you're the extra speaker? You get it over with as quickly as possible, but it's impossible to get an introduction of Sylvia over quickly. What I'd like to do briefly is talk about her foundation. Sylvia Earle Alliance Mission Blue is a foundation that's dedicated to the establishment of marine sanctuaries. We call them hope spots. And what we do is we create outreach materials, we communicate, we facilitate, we get groups together, the powers that be together to help accelerate the creation of these marine sanctuaries. A lot of these sanctuaries are very difficult to create. They take years to create, and we try to accelerate that process because it is a race against time. These hope spots, these 50 hope spots that we've identified on the planet are decaying rapidly. They're being overfished rapidly. So the more quickly we can do this, the better off we are. So we try to create the outreach materials and try to make that job easier for everyone. Now I'd like to just briefly introduce Sylvia. Sylvia's been a friend of mine for, gosh, 10 or 15 years now. She needs no introduction. I think if occasionally we get a chance to see somebody do what they were born to do, whether it's to see Michael Jordan play basketball or to see Eric Clapton play the guitar. Well, tonight we're going to see somebody talk about the ocean. And the reason she's so good at talking about the ocean is because she's lived it for so long. Her story started way back when. It goes through the 30s and the 40s. It goes through the 50s. She's broken gender barriers. She's broken depth barriers. She's broken scientific barriers. I had the pleasure of getting a private viewing of a movie of her life recently, and it's remarkable to see a movie of somebody that is so accomplished through the decades, but at the end you would expect after so many decades of such accomplishment that there would be some kind of arc, but actually at the end of the movie you realize, when you do see the movie, you realize that this life is still going straight up. She's just doing remarkable things. And with that, I'll leave the podium to Sylvia.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, all of you, for coming in and leaving the fish to themselves for a little bit. I have to edit what you quoted me as saying. I mean, because after all, I said it. It is that the most important thing that we extract from the ocean is our existence. It's not oil and gas, it's not fish, it's our existence. That's the most important thing we take from the sea. That's it. See you later. All the rest is just filler. All of our existence up to the present time, we have tended to take the ocean and what we extract from it very much for granted. I guess the theme of my comments tonight, and I said it to the legislators and others, staffers we met with today, this is the sweet spot in time, because never before could we know what we now know, and never again will there be a chance as good as what we have right now to sort of make the world, ensure that there's going to be a place in the world for us. And let me start with a little graph, the only graph I'm going to show you. But it represents 100,000 years of Earth history. There have been some ups and downs. People have been around this whole time, not very many of us until fairly recently on this graph, the last 10,000 years, that's when we humans really sort of took off, our numbers climbing to what we now understand, about 7 billion of us, and the graph keeps going up. This doesn't show the population, this just shows some of the ups and downs that the planet has gone through. And if you go back a million years, a billion years, 2 billion, 3 billion, 4 billion, you'll see far wider swings. But this is it. This is a time when, in all of Earth's history, we have prospered. And our prosperity presently looks pretty solid until you peel back the layers and ask the question, where did we come from? Who are we? And where are we going? Of all the creatures on the planet, we have the capacity to look back in time. There's some smart critters out there. There's some in the aquarium here. I've met some pretty smart fish. And whales. And think about elephants, cats, dogs. They've got big brains, but they cannot know what we know. 10-year-olds now have the benefit of all preceding human knowledge available to them in ways that I didn't have when I was a 10-year-old. We have access to the Library of Congress and the little thing you carry around in your pocket. And Google Earth. Oh, I love Google Earth. This is not Google Earth. But the idea that we can see through the eyes of somebody like Kathy Sullivan from high in the sky, we can share that view of ourselves from afar. Now, birds fly high in the sky, but they can't go as high as Kathy Sullivan and come back and bring the news to all of the other birds and say, well, you know what, this is it. It's all there is. And when you look up and see those sparkly things in the sky, we know what they are. We have some idea, at least. Dolphins may wonder too, but they cannot know what we know. Now we know, because of all preceding history, that it's the water that sets this place apart. There's water elsewhere in the universe, but an ocean, a liquid ocean filled with life that generates most of the oxygen in the atmosphere, more than half, takes up a lot of the carbon, holds the planet steady, governs climate and weather, all these things that information, knowledge that is available to everyone as we begin going into the 21st century as humans measure time. So, I've been asked sometimes, why should I care about the ocean? Well, if you like to breathe, you will care about the ocean. If you like water in any form, liquid, solid, up in the sky as clouds, you will care about the ocean because the ocean is where most of it is. Think Mars, if you think the ocean doesn't matter. Not a very hospitable planet for the likes of us, and no other place that we know about in the universe, in fact, can put up with 7 billion people, or even 7 of us. Well, maybe a few will someday set up housekeeping on the red planet with a life support system tucked along with them. The atmosphere of Mars is thought to be mostly carbon dioxide. Early Earth atmosphere, similarly, was not hospitable. It's taken a long time to get this planet just right for us. It's taking a very short time for us to unravel some of those processes that make our lives not just prosperous, but even possible. So some of our clever friends from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution did this exercise. They took all the water in the world, all the lakes, all the rivers, all the streams, all the clouds, all the groundwater, all the oceans, all the water that is in every ant, every bird, every cat, dog, every human. And that's it, that blue ball. Doesn't look like very much when you gather it all together and put it next to the Earth as a whole. And yet, if you spread it out, the average depth of the ocean is 2.5 miles, the maximum 7 miles. And we're just beginning to understand what it means and why it matters. No ocean, no life. No blue, no green. Huh. Take that, you green conservation characters. think blue, and then you can think green. There it is. Atmosphere, ocean, water. That's what keeps us alive. But it isn't just the water. It's life in the water that makes Earth hospitable for us. It isn't water that generates oxygen and takes up carbon. It's the little guys, little creatures in the water. We are just beginning to understand the connections between the skies above, the ocean, the fabric of life of which we are very much a part. Most of the fresh water on the Earth, that's only 3% of the water as a whole, is tied up in polar ice, mostly Antarctica. Water issues are getting to be really more and more significant as we understand what the limits are. So, 2 years ago, I had a chance to meet this bird, this Laysan albatross, halfway across the Pacific Ocean. She began to fly at about the same time I learned to dive. In the 1950s, she's sitting on her most recent egg. And I just had to think about the changes that have taken place since then. There were no marine sanctuaries anywhere in the world when I started to dive and when this bird, known to her human admirers as wisdom. And why weren't there? Because we didn't think we had to take care of the ocean. The ocean is so big, so vast, and so resilient. We thought there's nothing that humans could do to harm the ocean. Our job was to go out and take from the ocean whatever we could. And that's been the attitude throughout our history. We're takers. Use the land, use the water, use the wild creatures for all the benefits that they can give us. It's only right about now, with 7 billion of us, plus the collective knowledge, maybe even a shred of wisdom, that we can see what the limits are and how what we are doing to change the nature of nature may reflect on our future. We've used nature forever. Only now can we see that we have to take care of the systems that take care of us. So, go back to the 60s when for the first time we began to go aloft into the sky and get that perspective. It's been a remarkable ride for humankind in this half century or so of understanding these big questions. Who are we and where do we come from? And where are we going? We now are connected in ways that even I as a kid just could not imagine, that you could actually talk to people with something you carry around in your pocket. I mean, this is a new world, and we are the beneficiaries. This is the sweet spot in time. As never before could we know what we know, as never again will we have a chance to exercise that knowing in a way that will perhaps ensure a long and prosperous future for ourselves. I mean, you can get really doomy and gloomy about all the bad news, about the reduced water, about what we're doing to the atmosphere, about the acidification of the ocean, about the loss of diversity. But it's knowing that counts. Now we can make the connections that none of our predecessors could. That the sands from the Sahara blow across the Atlantic Ocean and wind up here on our heads in Baltimore. And some continues on to dust the snows of Colorado and even further to go into the Pacific Ocean. We can see it from high in the sky in ways that no human could, let alone no other creature on Earth. We're able to measure, provide evidence of change. We're able to see what none of us could really imagine until we had the evidence before us to measure ice in the Arctic. Oh, I lied. There are two graphs. This is the second. This is the only other one, just showing how the ice in polar areas has declined in just a blink of a geologist's eye. So why do we have to protect the natural systems? Because we like the world that works in our favor. We like the fact that we can breathe, that there is oxygen being generated, carbon being captured. We like the nitrogen cycle, although you may not know about it or talk about it. It is what part of the basis of what holds the planet steady. The melting ice, the warming trend that we're experiencing, although not today, the changes that we're seeing, the swings in climate, the swings in temperature, but generally speaking, a trend toward warming with the loss of polar ice. Bad news for polar bears, bad news for walruses, bad news for us. The increased intensity and increased frequency of storms based on what we know of the history of storms in the past, all happening on our watch. But lucky us, we are armed with knowledge. You cannot solve a problem unless you know you've got one. Well, we've got one, or two or three. We are now able to measure and observe and see not only that coral reefs are declining by about half since wisdom learned to fly and I learned to dive, partly driven by a warming planet, partly driven by the extraction of fish from coral reefs, partly driven by what we're putting into the ocean other than carbon dioxide that's moving toward an acidified ocean, a number of stresses. It would be bad news, really bad news, if we didn't know what's happening, but we do know. We can see what we're putting into the ocean coming back to us. Ha-ha, a gift from the sea. It's actually a gift from ourselves back on the beaches. I come from the pre-Plasticozoic. Huh. So I know that we can get along without plastics. All preceding humankind got along without them, and I love plastics. I must say, I think my buttons are made of plastic. I'm addicted to Ziplocs. I can probably not move 2 or 3 steps without stumbling into something where plastic has shaped our lives in a more or less positive way. It's what we do with them, the one-time use, the throwaway attitude that we have, burning through the assets, not caring about the consequences until you know you've got a problem. Well, we certainly do have some problems, and we're seeing it. And that's, again, the good news. Now we know. We can actually look at the consequences of our carelessness and do something about it. Birds don't know where all this plastic comes from. In fact, this is one of wisdom's neighbors out at Midway, making a nest in an old fishing net. Good heavens. I guess it's one of the better uses for some of that trash. A nice, soft place to put feathers and line a nest. But look at all that garbage. And this is halfway across the Pacific. There are not many people there. It comes from all over the Pacific, gathering on these little islands relentlessly, the recipient of the flow of plastic debris. Well, it's not the only thing we put into the ocean, you know. It's what we allow to flow there from the land or what we deliberately put into the ocean, changing the chemistry of our life support system. Again, the key is seeing it, knowing it, understanding it, and then perhaps being motivated to do something about it. Oh, darn, there's another graph. Well, not quite a graph, but at least this image assembled, this is our part of the world, the North Atlantic, looking at those bright red areas are high concentrations of fish going back to 1900. Well, look at the next picture, 100 years later. The big concentrations of fish are in red. Huh. Like, where are they? We have scooped them out of the ocean. We're so good at catching fish, so good at consuming fish, so that now on the order of 90% of some that we love to eat the most, such as tunas and swordfish and cod and herring and halibut. We still see them in the markets, but we don't see them in the ocean. We have to go further, deeper, longer, greater investment, more technologies to continue that supply chain from the wild ocean to us. Well, we've got a problem. So it's our job now to solve this problem. What are we going to do about it? Now we can see what happens when a net goes over the side. I mean, all preceding history, we didn't have scuba, we didn't have remotely operated cameras that could go down and observe the consequences to the deep sea below, or even from looking high above. This is China, where shrimp boats are just plowing their way across a shallow seabed to capture wildlife from the sea. But on one side of the screen, you see, well, you can almost hear the music, and you know, it's a nice, peaceful, wild, productive system. And the other image on your right side of the screen, that's after a trawl has scraped the ocean floor. So which do you think is a healthier place? Which does more good for the ocean, for us? If you've seen Forrest Gump, and if you haven't, you should, it's a great movie. It's shrimp in every way you can think of, you know, boiled, fried, steamed with gumbo and whatever. But we're now understanding the cost of taking wild shrimp, scraping the ocean floor, sacrificing a lot of the creatures along with taking things we like to eat. And there are other shrimp, little things that we don't even eat. Krill from Antarctica that you can find in your local pharmacies, krill oil. You can find it in cat food. You can find it when you eat chicken, or sometimes beef or pork, because krill from Antarctica are, and many other creatures from the sea are now ground up and turned into animal food. We don't even see them whole. We just see them in other forms. No one could ever even get to Antarctica with a big boat in the 1950s when wisdom began to fly and I first learned how to dive. But now, thousands of tons of krill and other creatures are taken from the ocean in Antarctic waters. When I started to dive, well, I was told to watch out for the sharks. This was before Jaws, before Peter Benchley, bless his flippers, wrote that wonderful novel, entertaining story, but it was just a story, but people took it seriously. People were afraid to take a bath after they read Jaws. Anything with water associated with it was to be avoided. Well, man-eating sharks turn out not to be the problem. Not at all. You know, I've been in the water in places surrounded by sharks. I don't pay any attention. And it isn't just because I don't qualify. I'm not, you know, man-eating sharks. Half the people in this room, no problem. Well, actually, none of us should worry about sharks. But sharks have to worry about us. It's man-eating sharks. You know, we have the power to kill. We could, if we really put our minds to it, we could eliminate almost all the sharks on the planet. They've been around for more than 300 million years, and on our watch, 90% of many of them are gone. Some of the deep sea ones are still in pretty good shape, but those that we can get to are, you know, we've done such a good job of turning them into shark fin soup and a macho meal or whatever it is, whatever you use a shark for other than a companion in the sea. These are just fins in Hong Kong on the rooftop, drying. Millions of sharks are consumed by us. How many people have ever, in all of our history, been consumed by sharks? Not many in that big balance sheet. Well, I don't think any tuna has ever taken a bite out of us, but we have certainly taken a lot of bites out of them. And it's the same with species after species, wildlife. Bushmeat in the sea. We just don't think of it necessarily as wildlife. Now, I personally stopped eating fish a long time ago. I think I started out saying, well, I figure if I don't eat them, they won't eat me. But it's more than that. I think I've come to see values like birds. I don't eat songbirds or eagles or owls. I do eat chicken once in a while. But the idea that their value alive in the ocean, especially when their numbers are down so low, is too important to risk my consuming them. I know how good they taste, but I've given them up. Well, it's that mercury. I miss that little essence of mercury. With whales, we used to think of them as commodities, pounds of meat, barrels of oil, and in some countries, whales are still taken for those purposes, but we've come to respect whales for other reasons. Respect. I think that's what it comes down to, understanding, knowing. We owe, all of us, a great debt to the industries that have extracted fossil fuels and made our civilization prosper because of the sources of energy that power us to the levels of prosperity that we all now enjoy. The lights are on. I can click this thing and it responds up there because fossil fuels are at the heart of it. Of course, in the end, it's all about the sun. Sun's energy locked into now fossilized creatures that we are burning through. They've been accumulating for millions of years, and in a few decades, we're just burning through those assets, but it gives us such an important thing. I mean, warmth, yes. Light, yes. Cars, yes. Airplanes. I got here, took an overnight flight from a conference in California to get here. Thank you, fossil fuels. But the biggest gift is knowing. It's knowing that now we have to change our ways because of the issues that we can see that none before us could possibly see. We have satellites up in the sky because fossil fuels get them there. But going forward, now that we know there are unintended consequences, we've got to think differently. We've got to use 7 billion brains or even a small number, whatever it takes, to figure things out going forward. There's, I keep forgetting these graphs. And forget this graph, but just look at the numbers, just the big swaths. It's the bottom three, the big wedges of, that's what powers our civilization, coal, oil, gas. And it's increasing. When is it going to level off? When are we going to get smart enough, capable enough to see those graphs heading in the other direction? One more. Maybe this is the last. It's just our population. And anybody who's been around for more than a few years knows that, well, when I arrived on the planet, there were 2 billion people. When my father was here, it was about 1.5 billion. He was born in 1900, my mother 1902. By 1980, there were 4 billion. Now, you know the numbers. Earth doesn't get any bigger. There's no more water than what we've got. The air that we breathe, the space we occupy, our life support system, we're eroding it away. Now, my favorite creature on the planet is a human being. I am one, and I love who and what we are, and I especially love our ability to think and act based on what we know. So, the conference I was just at, The Economist, they're now getting it. I mean, this is the second big conference they've had on the ocean. The ocean, and what are the limits? Where have we come from? Where are we going? And understanding that not just the economy, not just our health, not just our security, but really, in the discussions I participated in over the last couple of days at Half Moon Bay in California, and 2 years before in Singapore, with people they brought from all over the world to talk about the ocean, it is about life itself. The first priority is to keep the world safe, hospitable. Just this past year, the World Bank has been sponsoring conferences. I mean, this is unprecedented when you get the big economic drivers globally to think about taking care of the assets. I gave a talk at the World Bank a couple of years ago. I put that image of Earth from space on the screen, that image that didn't exist when I was a kid, but every kid now has seen it one way or the other. I pointed to it and I said, there it is, the World Bank. Because that is where all the assets are. And we have been drawing them down relentlessly during all of our history. But what are the benefits? How can we use the ocean to economic advantage and not use the ocean up? tourism is the biggest dollar driver now in the ocean, it turns out. Tourism, call it education if you will, not just big boats like this that have a downside as well as an upside, but people getting out to splash around in the oceans, to understand the ocean. Now we can make the connection upstream with downstream. How are we going to feed ourselves? I've been to any number of food security conferences in the last 5 years or so. The ocean doesn't even enter into the conversation, but I go to, because most of the calories that feed us come from plants, corn, rice, wheat, and the animals that we grow that eat the plants, all grazers. What we derive from the ocean is a relatively small part of our global menu in terms of calories. I go to ocean conferences, though, and the big conversation is food security related to what we can extract from the ocean. Somehow, this has to be rectified, because to feed ourselves, 7 billion mouths and more coming, we have to get smarter. We have to think, how can we use the planet and not use it up? We're beginning to understand the importance of mangroves in coastal areas, marshes in places along this coast. We're beginning to see the carbon cycle rocks. Whoever talked about the carbon cycle 20 years ago? Well, maybe in this room, not everybody talks about the carbon cycle, but some of us do. About what happens when you exhale. Carbon dioxide goes into the atmosphere. When you burn, when you drive a car. That's what's driving the global warming and ocean acidification. And the roots of mangroves, forests, or whether they're rainforests or plants on the land everywhere, and the little guys that live in the sea. Not just the seagrass meadows, although they're very important in that respect, but the little itsy bitsy tiny things that, one kind in particular, that nobody even knew of its existence until 1985. That's before some of you were born, but nonetheless, not very long ago by wisdom's standards, or mine. 1985, Penny Chisholm, a scientist from MIT with her colleagues, in operating off Bermuda, sampling what looked like perfectly clear ocean water, discovered this creature, Prochlorococcus. It's not on t-shirts in most places, and most politicians never heard of Prochlorococcus. Maybe you haven't either. School kids are just learning about it. But you should thank Prochlorococcus for 1 in every 5 breaths you take. 20% of the oxygen is generated by this one kind of bacterium that is photosynthetic, churns out oxygen, grabs carbon, helps drive the way the world works. Total chlorophyll in the whole planet. Look at where the ocean falls. You know, about half of it, perhaps more than half, out there in the sea. These little guys, you know, be glad you're a human, because birds can't see this. Dogs can't see this. Dogs could not pronounce Prochlorococcus, but you can. And understand where your breath comes from and why we need to take care of the ocean, because the ocean takes care of us. And then there are the little guys that eat the Prochlorococcus and the coccolithophorids and the diatoms, these other phytoplankton creatures that generate much of the oxygen and take up much of the carbon. Things that we could not see, did not know of their existence until fairly recently. We are blessed, not just among all the creatures on the planet, but even among humans. We didn't know, did not have the capacity to know until right about now, about how their lives and ours link together. Now, some of the biggest creatures in the sea, like the biggest fish, the whale sharks, actually consume many of these small creatures, but by and large, fish that we think of as the fish that we consume ourselves, the cod, the groupers, the snappers, the tunas, they cannot get to those small creatures. But menhaden can. Menhaden and herring and some of the other little low in the food chain creatures, and they are the middlemen without whom the big fish simply don't have access to the source of food, the sunlight to plants to food for life in the sea. Squid, predators, every one of them. They don't eat the plankton. They eat little fish and small things that eat the plankton. So, again, it's so cool to be around at a time when humans can get in the ocean. The first great oceanographic expedition ever globally was in 1872. 4 years, the Challenger expedition. They did not have snorkels and masks, scuba tanks, or anything like that. No submarines at that point in time. It was the same year that Yellowstone National Park was established, 1872. 100 years later is when the National Marine Sanctuary legislation came into place. It took us 100 years to figure out that maybe we should be protecting the ocean with policies such as we began to understand late in the 1800s and early in the 20th century. So we have national parks. The best idea America ever had, some say, having protected areas on the land. And what are we trying to protect? At first, beautiful places, scenery, recreation. We still want to protect that. But fundamentally, we're now understanding that protecting areas of special significance on the land carries more weight than that, protects water, generates oxygen, holds the planet steady. And in the ocean, it's the same way, protecting places where even the fish are safe. Tunas, where do they spawn? Those are areas that we should be protecting. On our watch, in our time, we have this gift of being high in the sky, deep in the sea. I've had the joy of walking around myself using astronaut-like equipment in that whether you're high in the sky or deep in the sea, you have to take your life support system with you. You really appreciate where air comes from. The space station, high in the sky. Well, there are a few space stations in the sea as well. This one, the Aquarium, still working down in the Florida Keys. Once a part of NOAA, not now, it's more moving into private support, but whatever it is, it enables people to stay for extended periods of time underwater. I've done it now 10 times, most recently 2 years ago. It is so cool to be able to sleep with a fish. Oh, and some of your fellow aquanauts, aquahunks as well. And to walk through that door that's liquid into the ocean, using the ocean as a laboratory. That's the joy of being able to do that. And now with the new technologies to do what was described by John in the earlier about being able to speak from one ocean to another. Well, here I was able to speak and appeared as a moment of Zen on the Jon Stewart Show. Sharing the view, that's what we can do now. Sharing the news, divers. There are millions of divers who get into the ocean now and really get acquainted with fish swimming in something other than lemon slices and butter. Getting to see their faces, getting to see their beauty of them, like birds. We used to eat all kinds of birds. We eliminated the birds that once were as common as menhaden, the passenger pigeons, like rivers in the sky. They're all gone, and maybe the menhaden will be too, unless we pull ourselves up by our socks and say, wait a minute, we need those guys for something more than cat food and oil. We can begin to appreciate them. And if you don't want to go out in the ocean and get wet, although I hope you will, it's the best aquarium in the world. This aquarium I consider to be like a halfway house for fish and people. And it's great that we can do this. You don't even have to get wet to see fish faces and to realize they're all different. Like every cat, dog, human, and bird. It's true with fish. You go stand out in front of the tank and look at the fish, and you'll see the little differences in all of them. I don't know why it matters, but it speaks to the diversity of life and also speaks to the common ground we all share. Whether you're a fish deep in the sea or a bird high in the sky, you know, we have the common chemistry of life that holds us all together. We all, every one of us, no matter how deep in the ocean or high in the sky we are, we all need water. Water is the key. And shrimp. Well, most people think yum yum shrimp, but there are all kinds of shrimp. If you get out in the ocean or come to this aquarium, you can see some of these variations on the theme of life. If you confine your days and nights to just the human society and do not get yourself out into the ocean, you miss so much. This is such a wonderful, diverse world, and most of that diversity is out there in the ocean. All the major divisions of animal life are there. Only about half of them occur in all of the rainforests, deserts, and other parts of the planet above the water put together. So if you want to get into the sea and see things with new eyes, this is the moment to be born. I think it's just going to get better if we keep our act together. But new equipment like this, it's Street View, underwater. This was demonstrated at the Economist meeting. Google is now featuring it on Google Earth, little windows of 360 views of looking underwater. Well, it doesn't go very deep yet. The ocean is, after all, 2.5 miles deep. And average, that's just the average, 7 miles for the maximum. When, how, who is going to really get to the ocean and see it from the inside out? We have, like drones in the sky above, we have drones now going through the ocean, gathering data, getting information on temperature. This is from Rutgers University. Little drones that fly across. One made a famous voyage all the way across the ocean, all by itself. Remotely operated systems. These require humans operating from the surface, but actually they do a lot of the heavy lifting now to remotely gather information. A little bit like the creatures that are up on Mars or on the moon that crawl around and give us a view of what's there and gather samples, sense what's there. And what is there? Now, again, for the first time in human history, we're getting down to the great depths to see creatures that don't require sunlight. They chemosynthesize, gathering minerals from the water to drive the systems. Hydrothermal vents filled with bacteria. And the giant squid of all squids observed for the first time only about a year ago, using equipment that did not exist when I was a child. Or out in Hawaii, there are 2 little submarines that can go to 2,000 meters, that enable, it's more than a mile, you can go down and see creatures that are 6,000 years old. What was the world like 6,000 years ago when some of the corals that you can visit in a little submarine, what was humankind like at the time that this coral was just beginning to grow? And where in the whole world are the systems that can take us down to visit where most of the real world is, in the ocean? Well, this is a Russian submarine, goes to 6,500 meters. This is the Japanese, 6,000, what did I say? That's Russian, that goes 6,000 meters, 6,500, the Shinkai, 6,500. France has a 6,000 meter sub. China has a 7,000 meter sub that they let me crawl inside and look, but they haven't let me take it out into the ocean yet. But it's there to be done. On your watch, in our time, just as the early days of aviation have taken us to great heights and great new knowledge, so the technologies that we are now experiencing, early days of ocean technology, if we're a century behind in a way. Now, there's some sophisticated systems, a lot of them for military uses. But when you think about it, there are only a handful of submersibles that can go to half the ocean's depth with people on board, and still a very small number that can even take just instruments into the sea. But we are so lucky. Kathy Sullivan has driven this submarine, and so have I. It's so simple, even a scientist, even the head of NOAA can operate it. Well, I expect that of Kathy. She flies jets and things, but I mean, I'm a botanist. But I love the ability to have, I want Hertz Rent-A-Sub so that I can take off into into the sanctuary systems all around the coast. And in fact, over a 5-year period, that's just what we did. Sustainable Seas expeditions with the National Geographic Society, with support from NOAA and from the Goldman Foundation, private support, public-private partnership, scientists and partners in academia, in industry, and just school kids that would gather around when we stopped in Monterey, stopped along the coast of Texas before going out to the Flower Garden banks, stopped in Tampa, Florida, or in the Florida Keys, or in Stellwagen Bank. We made the rounds over that 5-year period, trying to encourage people to think about their blue backyard. And I think it's paying off with new understanding and new excitement, not just about the coastal areas, but what's in the deep sea beyond. We're seeing a moment of growth as understanding of why the ocean matters and its relevance back to us is beginning to click in. Now, we don't have Hertz Rent-A-Sub yet, but there are a few coming along. This one is in Costa Rica. You actually can buy a ticket. You don't have to be a scientist, although it's fun to be a scientist and go out there and tool around. I've had the fun of actually starting 3 companies to build equipment, including on the books, one that will go to 1,000 meters. My daughter and son-in-law own and operate this company. They let me come in and play once in a while. This is the sub of my dreams, 1,000 meters. Maybe we will have Rent-A-Sub one of these days. There are a few out there. We need more of them. And we need more of you to say, I want to go. I want to do what Don Walsh did back in 1960 with Jacques Picard and go to the deepest part of the ocean. Well, actually, as it turns out, Jim Cameron, who makes films, like a little kid, he loves to make films like Titanic and Terminator and Terminator 2 and Avatar. He says he makes films so he can build submarines, so he can go to the deepest part of the ocean. He's truly an explorer at heart, and explorers are truly kids at heart. So, just 2 years ago, he made the ultimate descent and the ultimate return to the surface. One-way trips, he says, don't count. Having the ability to use a manipulator, an arm that can be an extension of you inside a warm, dry place with a 1 atmosphere air to breathe. And a little piece of California made the descent with him, the manipulator made by the company that my daughter and son-in-law own and operate. But here's the thing. Here is the big news. Humans make things up. We decided in the 20th century to carve out 200 miles of the ocean from every coastal nation and regard it as under their jurisdiction. It's taken a little time, but that green area around all of the continents is now within national jurisdiction. So this country is more than twice as big as what you think of it as being. Costa Rica is 10 times as big as what you see on most maps. Little island countries in the Pacific, some of them are 100 times bigger as ocean countries than they are if you just count the land. This is a moment in time. And think about our own exclusive economic zone, where we have a chance to think about the value, the benefits of what the ocean delivers to us, and the opportunity we have to take the tools we currently have, the legislation for establishing, quotes, parks, protected areas, national marine sanctuaries in the sea, while there's still time, while half the coral reefs are still in pretty good shape, while we still have some sharks, while there's still herring, while in Chesapeake Bay there's still some menhaden, if we protect them and choose the places carefully and realize the benefits back to us at this moment in time when we are faced with all kinds of pressures. I mean, you could go into a deep, dark sulk when you think, acidification, climate change, chemical pollution, what am I going to do? Woe is me. And I mean, I could talk myself into a big depression if I tried, because look at all the pressures. We're now climate change, oh dear, human population growing, and it's really cause for despair. And especially this last one. Surprise! Sandy is lurking right out there, ready to strike a coast near you. And there's black swans, these unexpected things that we don't know yet how to calculate or anticipate for, except in one big way. Protect the assets. This is like common sense. Protect big places in the ocean. This country, joining with a handful of others, will be meeting in Bermuda in just a couple of weeks. I'll be there to sign a declaration called the Hamilton Declaration to say we care about the high seas beyond national jurisdiction because it matters back to us. Protected areas in the global commons. It builds on the marine sanctuary concept and takes it out into the other half of the world beyond national jurisdiction. So, it's an idea whose time has come. Lucky you. You're here as witnesses. You're here as those who can make a difference, whether it's in the Sargasso Sea, nursery areas for turtles, for eels, for lots of things. The good news is that we're here. If you could be born anywhere in time, choose now. Choose now when kids are wearing pro-chlorococcus t-shirts. When kids in Hong Kong are saying, I will protect sharks. I will not eat sharks. Looking at the world as a whole, you know, good news, those dark blue places are places of hope. Places where people have taken action. This country has been a leader. Other countries are following, but we need to lead ourselves and follow ourselves with more as we understand the benefits. Places that are protected economically give big dividends very quickly, whether it's in the Florida Keys or in Cabo Polmo, Mexico, where this picture was taken. After 15 years of protection, a place that was essentially stripped of its fish has come back with a resounding plus. Other fish have come in, set up housekeeping. They're safe havens. It's great for tourism. Crazy people such as I will pay big bucks to go dive there because you see things. You see a healthy ocean. And we can all breathe a little easier because oxygen is being generated, carbon is being captured in places that are healthy in the ocean. Really good news. This is just taken a few weeks ago. That's Wisdom with her latest chick. This is cause for hope. Hope spots are those places on the planet, I've really directed my attention mostly to the sea, where if you invest, there's reason for hope. My colleague at the National Geographic, Enrique Sala, has a project going that he calls Pristine Seas, looking for those areas that are still in great shape. And we're doing some of that with the Marine Sanctuary Program too. Go for the places that, you know, if you protect them now before they degrade, great. That's cause for hope. But look at Chesapeake Bay. For me, a big hope spot. It's not exactly pristine. But there are some oysters left. There are some clams. There's some crabs. There's some menhaden. If we do a better job of protecting them, there's reason for hope. Not just for them, but for us. Now, if you have the patience for 5 more minutes, we'll show you a little film clip about hope spots, about what we're trying to do with Mission Blue. It's all about giving back to the ocean. It's about taking care of the ocean as if our lives depend on it, because they do. So, this is just a trailer for the 90-minute, oh dear, long film. But the kids today seem to like it. I mean, I have to say, it's great when you get a reaction from teenagers of the sort that we had this morning. A standing ovation for a film from teenagers in high school? Well, we'll see. You may not think so when you see the ultimate film. This is just a little taste, a little trailer of things to come. And we have this idea, we humans, that the ocean is so big, so vast, so resilient, it doesn't matter what we do to it.
That was crazy.
Our ignorance is really the biggest problem that we now face. We now can learn from the past, and as never before, do something about it before it's too late.
Sylvia has a wish for the planet, what she calls her Mission Blue. And it's really very simple. Protect the ocean in the same way we now protect the land.
In 1872, the United States began establishing a system of parks that some say was the best idea America ever had. About 12% of the land around the world is now protected, but only a fraction, 1% of the ocean, is fully protected globally. I wish you would use all means at your disposal to ignite public support for a global network of marine protected areas, hope spots, large enough to save and restore the ocean, the blue heart of the planet. My wish is a big wish, but if we can make it happen, it can truly change the world. That's the really short version, and that's okay. That's okay. I think the bottom line here is thank you, all of you. You're all reasons for hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. For those that would like, we're going to take a few minutes, maybe about 10, to offer a chance to ask questions of Sylvia. And so I'll be the moderator, and I may cut you off if you have a long diatribe, but if you have a question...
He's talking to me now.
Not her. I know not to cut her off. So we have one here in front. Go ahead. No, I'll paraphrase right. Oh, okay.
I think it's about time the human race looks within. Why are we breeding ourselves into this disaster? Why do we need 7 billion people on the planet? And what is the cause of this? I mean, this has never happened before in human history, and I study history. 7 billion people. Why is this happening? Thank you.
As a biologist, I can probably... No, I agree, I hear you. And our prosperity heretofore, and even right now, has been derived from tapping in to the benefits of all preceding history. Really, I look at these fish, some of them that arrive in our markets have never known humans as predators before, like orange roughy. Who ever heard of orange roughy? Oh, yeah, right. And even sharks have never known humans as predators at the level that we now are imposing on these ancient systems. Well, it looks like we're really engaged in a high level of prosperity. But here's the thing. You can look at those stupid graphs. You can, now we know. I think that if we didn't know, we could continue down this pathway of eroding the natural systems, cutting the trees, poisoning the ocean and the water on the land as well, blindly. I think the best hope is, and I'm not alone in this, others can see the downside of continuing as we are, increasing our numbers and decreasing the quality and nature of our life support system. But now we know the kids aren't going to let us get away with it. I don't think they are. I think because they know what those who are now in positions of power could not know when they were kids, did not grow up with this perspective, could not see what's on the horizon if we continue doing what we're doing. And I think one cause for good news is that as people are educated and see that quality of life really counts, that having more mouths to feed than they can possibly manage is not a good recipe for prosperity. That it looks good on the surface of things. 7 billion people sounds like, we're really successful. But now we can see the downside. So I think cause for concern, but also plenty of reason for hope now that we know.
In front.
Great admirer, and I have to say, inspired by you, my wife and I were in Belize a month ago, and we were at Half Moon Key, and we went fishing and caught some queen triggerfish that we then used to catch barracuda that we then ate. So it sounds like there's a gray area, because I felt I was thinking, oh, Sylvia Earle will be proud of us. Here we are, surviving on our own. You know, we're Half Moon Key, and we're eating the resources here, barracuda, of which there were plenty, and queen triggerfish, of which there were plenty. So there is a gray area, don't you think? And how do we draw that line with that gray area with what we do to feed ourselves when we're in Half Moon Key at Belize?
Right. Well, we are by nature hunter-gatherers. I mean, through most of our history, that's how we made a living. But that's when our numbers were small and nature was dominant. I mean, natural systems, wild systems, when we did feed ourselves with wild birds. And just look at the consequences as our numbers increased and the wild things on the land decreased. As Ed Wilson has summed it up, he said, we ate the large, the slow, and the tasty out of existence. Large, the slow, and the tasty in the ocean. And it's happening so fast. We're eating creatures that have never been consumed by any humans in any time in the past because we couldn't get to where they are. And we have methods of finding them, methods of capturing them, and a system that encourages us to take more than we can use for dinner or to use for local consumption, because we have refrigeration now. We didn't have that 100 years ago. And we can gather using sophisticated new technologies thousands of tons, you know, in a bite. If we go to the right places, we can find them. So our technology has exceeded the capacity of the ocean to be able to keep up with what we take. Now, you going out to catch dinner, I think you can get away with that once in a while. But with 7 billion people, maybe we have to think how often we can get away with that. Most of what we consume comes from, calories, corn, rice, wheat, and to a growing extent, soy. There's a cost to that, of course, with the land. But it's the most efficient way to translate sun's energy through plants to protein. And when we go to the ocean, it's a much more complicated story, because sunlight to plants means those little tiny things that the big guys can't eat. So, a little creature this big is the equivalent of a tiger, because it's eating a grazer that eats plants. Food chains on the land are really short. Food chains in the ocean are really long. To make a pound of tuna probably takes 10,000 pounds of little plants going through a twisted food chain, many layers thick. So the efficiency, if you're feeding a lot of people, isn't great. But when the fish are free, cows aren't free, chickens aren't free, but the ocean, we haven't accounted for them as anything we have to pay for, but now we know we are.
Now,
So-
go ahead.
Okay.
We've got somebody over there
It's
on the
gonna
far
cut me
left.
off.
Go ahead.
Hello, Sylvia. Thank you. And actually, my question piggybacks over here. So my question was to ask you, you just drew to my thought process as to what are my food choices, and if my food choices might be more opting away from meat choices, going to the ocean and to plants, then maybe I feel good about myself. But I just heard now saying that it takes so many more resources to go to the ocean than to plants and meats. So, in your best advice for all of us, if we really want to encroach on our resources here in America, then what is the best for us to do? I think I just heard taking away from maybe the oceans and then maybe going to our plant sources and our meat sources. But I really would like to hear what is the best way that we can environmentally protect our resources here in the universe.
Well, it comes with knowing, understanding what it takes to make a cow, how many gallons of water, how many pounds of, or how many acres of land, you can do this. You couldn't do this 20 years ago, but now knowledge of what the investments are, it's transparency. The knowledge is out there. You can do the research yourself and find out, well, okay, what is in a tuna fish and where did it come from? How old is the fish? You know that most of the animals that we grow are really young. We don't eat 10-year-old chickens or 20-year-old cows. Most people don't. But in the ocean, a 10-year-old or 20-year-old or 50-year-old fish is not uncommon at all. It takes many sharks a decade or two or sometimes 3 just to mature. Orange roughy, about 30 years to mature. They can be 100 years, or some estimates to be more than 200 years old by the time they reach your, I mean, they haven't been sitting on the shelf that long, but you know. But it's knowing those things makes you think twice. Knowing that we used to eat a lot of wild birds. My uncle was a market hunter early in the 20th century. But we ate so many that they're gone. We haven't stopped eating birds. We're eating a lot of chickens and turkeys. We're making choices out of necessity, and also out of choice. We choose not to eat bluebirds and cardinals and eagles and owls. We choose not to. We could. I mean, they're edible, but we value them for other reasons. Now, nutrition, plants, I don't mean like just white bread. That's not as nutritious, we now know, as something that is more thoughtfully put together. Plants, though, are where the action truly is for most of animals on Earth and most of what feeds us as well. Now, I'm not against consuming meat, but I think we probably could get by with far less in this country. Some other parts of the world, they probably use a little more. But we really can have a better health and a better planet by making better food choices. Low on the food chain, please.
To Sylvia's point, in that whole idea that we have so much more information available to us now, if you want to get your omega-3 fatty acids, and you should, they're really good for us, they're brain food, you don't have to get them from fish. In fact, you shouldn't. And if you're still getting fish oil pills, please stop the next time you go to the health food store. Get plant-based omega-3 fatty acid supplements.
You'll miss the mercury.
You skip the mercury and leave a few Menhaden out there in the bay. I think we have time for one more. We got a mic down here. Oh, good. We've got a young lady. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Sylvia too. It's crazy, and I have something to give to you. I've been drawing something for you for the whole time you've been talking, and is it okay that I can give it to you now?
Please, yes. Why not?
Bring it down, Sylvia.
Is that her name?
Yes, she said her name's Sylvia.
Oh my goodness, I missed that.
If ever there was a photo op,
Please get this photo.
the two Sylvias.
Please get this photo.
Woohoo! It falls to me to tell you that we need to give this woman a break. I promised I would feed her. She did take a red eye to get here. She did speak to 2,000 kids who love the movie. You're going to love it, too. You have to see it. I feel so lucky that I was in there with those 2,000 kids cheering away. Then she went and, as I said, browbeat some congressmen into doing the right thing. She's been here with us now for an hour and a half. One more time, this amazing woman, Sylvia Earle.